If you're considering engineered wood floor, or you install engineered wood floor, you need to understand the parameters that accelerate the price point from entry level through to the exclusive. Today we're going to explain all of those parameters with an industry professional, Dave Waddy from Zimbo's. This is a video that you have to watch.
Got me up all night, putting things on the side. What do you have in mind? She's awake all the time. What are you trying to find? I hope this ain't a lie, 'cause I'm vibing with all we have. Yeah, I'm feeling what we are now. I'm laying down on the ground. All I do is thinking out loud. Yeah, I'm vibing with all we have.
Dave, thank you for time and opportunity to come through and chat to you about this beautiful wood that we're lusting after over here. There are a lot of questions within the marketplace with regards to different qualities of engineered oak, solid oak, etc.
Right.
Today I'd really like to focus on engineered oak and different kind of varieties we have in the marketplace.
Right.
But before we get into that, you're a foundational player within our solid and engineered wood marketplace. Tell me a bit more about your business and your services that you offer in the South African market.
We come from a solid background, a solid wood flooring background. And that the engineered flooring only in the last sort of 10 years has it really taken off. So prior to that, we all had to deal with solid wood flooring, which as we all know is a lot more fickle and a lot more tricky to deal with than the engineered. Because an engineered floor is a lot more stable and it obviously behaves a lot better, so you can get people that aren't as specialized necessarily installing it successfully.
Today I want to just clear up a couple of mistruths or confusion about the different types of engineered oak, with being the most popular in our marketplace, and the different types that you get, and understanding that some come in really cheap and some are really expensive, and it's a bit confusing about where the value is.
Right.
Could you explain a little bit about this to us?
Okay, well look, let's just go through the three basic constructions of an engineered board. You get effectively a veneer of oak that is now glued to something below it. Hence the term engineered. So you've got a wood substrate with hardwood on the top.
Yes.
So that's essentially what we're talking about engineered. Laminate is a plastic with a photograph on it for those lay people. Just saying. Engineered wood is wood all the way through, but it's not hardwood all the way through. The hardwood's on the top. So we have an MDF core. We have what we term a 3-ply construction, which is normally pine and poplar. So it's a softer material.
Yes.
Also not quite as stable as what people tout or sell as the premium product would be a multi-layer base. So that would normally be either a birch multi-ply or a eucalyptus multi-ply.
And may I ask just quickly while we're on that, birch and eucalyptus, why did they use birch and eucalyptus? I know, but I want for the audience to know.
Well, look, I think, you know, if you look at even things like exterior ply, which we use outside, these are very, very stable timbers, and they're obviously cross-laminated as well. So the cross-lamination is what gives you the stability. Also, the adhesive you use is very, very important to give you the stability as well.
And also, it's a lot cheaper than obviously your top wear layer.
Sure. And of course, what people don't understand, they always ask us, they come in and say, look, I want a solid wood floor because it's probably got a lot more life than an engineered floor. What you've got to remember is everything below the top of the tongue is a complete waste of material. You cannot use it. So
that's the tongue is the joint, the top third of the joint structure.
Right. So
let's do a close up on this.
Let's have a look at that. So effectively, on a solid timber floor, everything below the top of that tongue is never going to be used.
You can't sand into that, otherwise the joints start breaking through.
Right.
And I think we see a lot of the older homes where maybe they've been sanded too many times, and you start seeing the breakouts happen on that joint structure. And that's why, if you go solid, the bottom 2/3
Yeah.
from the top of that tongue below, you can't sand, it's wasted.
Yeah, and of course, solid timber moves more. So anything with a cross multi-ply, or in this case what I'm holding, this is a 3-ply, so you've got effectively pine and poplar
Yes.
with hardwood on the top. That's still way more stable than a solid plank.
Yeah.
And going in a little bit more depth on the engineered floors, quite frankly, I've had more problems as a supplier with my multi-layer floors in terms of having some issues with suppliers on a multi-layer than on a 3-layer. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you've got a 3-layer floor, it's inferior to a multi-layer. The only thing I would say that you can absolutely say for certain is that a 3-layer floor will have a little bit more movement to it. Therefore, if, for instance, you're gluing down, you've got to make quite sure you're using the correct moisture barrier before you glue down, because the 3-layer will move a little bit more. The multi-layer is more stable.
Okay, so when we start looking at the 3-layer, I notice there's quite an obvious characteristic down the side with regards to these gaps, which I think, in my understanding, allows for that extra little bit of movement, where these cross-layered blocks, actually are able to expand into those cavities rather than impacting the top surface.
Yeah,
Am I correct?
No, absolutely correct. Yeah, no, 100%. And then look, when we're talking, let's show the guys the multi-layer. So there you can typically see a multi-layer. So that's a 15 mil board, 15 mil being the actual
Total thickness
with 4 millimeters on the top.
Yep.
But with a multi-layer, a lot of the companies manufacture their own ply. So now let's start talking about your question, how much do you pay and what do you get? Well, the answer is somebody who's very, very cheap, 10 to 1, the ply is of a really uncertain quality or not good quality. And
that's a polite way of putting it.
And that gives you problems.
Yeah.
So for instance, where we've had some flooring failures in Cape Town, where I've been to a site where you could actually see those fillets that you're talking about.
Yes.
The moisture content of those fillets and the top layer was out of sync, so they were all going up and down. So it had this ripple effect.
So telegraphing.
Yes.
Is that telegraphing?
Right.
So there's another point that I learned, because I've also been to China a couple of times, and Europe, at the different factories, and the orientation of the grain of those fillets.
Right.
Where you have I think it was where they are vertical or up to 45 degrees, that's acceptable. When they're lying down on their side, because they expand more up and down between the winter growth and the summer growth, that's where they have a greater opportunity to actually push up and show telegraphing in the surface.
100%. And look,
that's quality. That's quality.
That's all quality. And at the end of the day, this goes back to the consumer. The consumer is very much in the hands of the supplier, and that is where a guarantee is important. So what guarantee is the supplier offering you? And also, how long have they been established for? Because really, it's not a difficult thing to import a product from China or Europe or anywhere. Your after-sales service is key.
And the understanding, like, are you going to be here tomorrow when there's a problem, or is it going to be closed doors?
And the installation method. So I think that's, the natural progression is to the installation method. Possibly also just going back to that MDF core.
Yes.
The MDF core is the least popular engineered board.
Yeah.
And is probably the cheapest.
So as we are going up from like a base level cost price, and we start elevating, if we look at the MDF options, we look at the glue, we look at the density of the core board, and how that lamella, that top wear layer, actually is bonded to the base board.
Sure.
So if you start compromising on quality, you're going to start engaging on issues on that.
Yeah, you'll get lipping and movement of the boards and all those things that you don't want to see.
Correct. Then we've got our 3-ply. Mm-hmm. Our 3-ply is also the quality of the layers and the orientation.
Yep.
And then there's the glue component of those layers.
Right.
Which you get waterproof, you get cheaper options, and that also, because I've seen boards where they just delaminate.
Right.
A little bit of moisture and they just start peeling apart. Or the wear layer on the top, like a 10-2, it's quite a thin wear layer. Sure. And depending on how that base ply is made, they sometimes want to separate, the divorce.
Well, I think it goes back to manufacturing. I mean, if they're gluing the veneer to the base, and if they're on the line and they, for instance, stop the line and then they restart it, now the adhesive is flashing off, it's now drying.
Understood,
So these are
so many
variables. But I think really the quality of the ply is critical. And then there's something we haven't mentioned, which is the moisture content of the hardwood layer. That is critically important. And then also linked to that is, where are you? So for instance, Windhoek.
Yes.
Windhoek is a real problem for all of us as suppliers. I now go so far as to actually have criteria. If you're installing an engineered floor in Windhoek, we state you need to be using humidifiers. It is so dry there that a normal wear layer will split and crack in Windhoek.
Even on a plug, even on an engineer.
It doesn't matter, but it's got nothing to do with the base. What it means is I've taken moisture readings on a floor that's been in Windhoek in the middle of their winter. It had close to 0% humidity.
So oven baked test.
Right. So this is a problem. Gauteng has similar problems too. Gauteng is not as extreme as Windhoek, but we also have issues with humidity, and they've got to watch what that moisture content is, because if it drops below a certain percentage, you're in trouble.
So that's what our brothers over the ocean, the Americans, they have their HVAC system where they blow in humidity or extract humidity to keep the floor and the interior of the home in a nice, comfortable living environment. But actually, it's absolutely critical to keep the timber stable.
Yeah, well, I mean, your average supplier, most suppliers will tell you need to be somewhere in the parameters of 35 to 65% odd humidity. Yeah. So you shouldn't be below that and you shouldn't be above that. Obviously, places like Durban, sometimes they're having 80, 90% humidity, so they have the opposite problem where you can actually have the boards expanding. So it is definitely a factor, but I think probably in South Africa we have more issues up on the reef, Johannesburg, and then places like Windhoek. So that's something to be aware of.
So for Mrs. Jones, the average consumer, we've gone into quite a bit of technical over there, and so they need to really trust their supplier and make sure that the supplier has been around for a long time and is established. If you're going to be buying goedkoop is duurkoop, the thing of where you buy cheap, it can be really expensive in the long run. A key component of what Mrs. Jones is looking at is she looks at the pretty color and the thickness.
Right.
So let's talk about surface finishing and the differences between like an oil, UV cure, a varnish, whatever, because that plays a big role in the immediate price and also the long-term price.
Right. Okay, so effectively you're probably looking at 3 different kinds of finishes.
Yeah.
So the most common finish, particularly if people are importing a finished product from China, 95% of those products will have a UV coating on the top. So for the layperson, all it essentially is, it's a plank of wood, which is an unfinished board, and it goes through a machine. It has a color sprayed onto the surface, the appropriate color, which is the UV coating.
Yeah.
And it really, you get a UV oil and you get a UV varnish, but essentially they are surface coatings. They are on the surface and then they go under a UV light which cures it instantly. The actual coating is very much more like a varnish.
Okay. And it's very thin?
Very thin. I mean, it's not to say that isn't tough. If you can get different grades of UV coatings. You can get incredibly strong UV coatings, you get very weak UV coatings. The problem is for the customers that if you obviously damage that UV coating, there's no easy way of repairing that without actually cutting a plank out and putting another one in.
Okay, so so if I have a UV coated floor and I damage it or it wears through over a couple of years, I'm actually either going to have to replace part of the floor, a plank, or sand and seal that floor again in situ.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Because you can't, there's no real way of now
touching it up with
you've got to basically remove that layer and then put a new layer on.
Okay.
So that's the UV coating, and that would by far, for most of the importers, is the most common. That is the most common coating, particularly if they're pre-finished out of be it China, Europe. Most of it's UV coating. Then you get what we call naturally oiled.
Okay.
A naturally oiled product is an oil that actually penetrates. So
Like a moisturizer, it sinks in.
Yeah, exactly. Very exactly. And so a natural oil gives you a very natural flavor to the wood.
Yeah.
It feels very good, and the wood is what we term open. So it looks beautiful, it's very natural. The problem with it is that particularly within the first month of laying a naturally oiled floor,
Yeah.
because it's open like that, if you spill something like, if you have an oiled floor in front of the stove and you have red hot cooking oil landing on that, it will mark a little bit. Also, if you drop red wine and you leave it to sit.
Red wine, South Africa.
Red wine and coffee. Red wine and coffee.
Red wine and coffee, okay.
Acidic. And also pets. Pets that are
Have accidents.
of various forms, that's a problem. But the thing with an oiled wooden floor is that as you do care maintenance on it, you close the surface. And the more maintenance you do with it, and this is not oiling, this is just the correct cleaning products.
Yes.
So everybody thinks if you've got an oiled floor, you have to put more oil all the time. Not the case.
Okay.
We have a variety. You have soaps, you have wax cleaners, you've got normal cleaners, there's a variety of cleaning options, but it doesn't mean you're oiling all the time at all. But that floor, the oiled floor, will improve with time. So as you go along, if you do regular care maintenance, you close the surface and it looks better and better. And then after 5 years, if you want to, you can do a deep clean and then re-oil the floor without really having to sand and seal.
Our final coating, water-based.
Yeah, so a water-based varnish, and again, this is something that's generally applied by hand. It's quite difficult to apply a water-based varnish through a machine because a water-based varnish is designed to flow and you need to get a certain amount of product on the surface. So very easy to have an oiling machine.
Yep.
The oil, you only need a very small amount, and it's generally put under pressure with a big roller. That's if you're using a pre-finishing plant.
Yep.
Or if you do it on site, you're using typically a stainless steel trowel and then you're buffing it in. But with a water-based varnish, you're typically going to be using a roller and it's got to put quite a lot of product onto the surface. The upside of a water-based varnish is that you can repair again. So unlike a UV coating, a water-based varnish, you can sand down a board and just isolate that board and repair.
So if I'm buying a UV pre-finished board
Yes.
versus maybe a raw with this water-based,
Yes.
that's actually the advantage. Is like I can do some spot repairs, I can actually service the floor a lot cheaper in the long run than my pre-finished board.
Yeah, I mean the UV coated board, I would say probably has the most perfect looking finish. If you look at an advantage of it, it is because of with the machine, it looks point perfect, almost to the point where you could.
Well, then I can get plastic or laminates or whatever. Wood by its natural inherent nature is natural.
Sure.
It gets a couple of dings and whatever, and that's what we fall in love with.
Sure. Look, I think again it's subjective, but I'd agree with you. But certainly repairing the UV coated floors is really it's a lot easier just to cut a plank out and put another one in and try and fiddle around.
Okay.
And also, I guess if you're matching it with staircases, if you're trying to match a solid nosing to the plank, so for the installer, this starts being a little bit more tricky unless the importer imports the nosing. And so, I mean, that's possible too. So it all really then goes back to, I think a lot of it goes back to the people who are installing.
Yes.
And I think
the craftsmanship.
Yeah, the craftsmanship. And if you talk about the installation side, I think probably some of the poorest quality in terms of your installation, some of the most common complaints is the actual finishing, the trims and the nosings and sort of it's not tidy, it's not done correctly, and that is one of the problems is the final detail,
detailing.
And unfortunately, the detail is important. Why is a board more expensive? The wider you go, the more you're going to pay. The longer the board, the more you're going to pay. The less knots and the less sapwood in the hardwood layer, the more you're going to pay.
What is sapwood?
Sapwood is effectively the outside of the tree, and that's typically the white flashes that you see. So there you can see that is sapwood and that is heartwood. So we can purchase flooring without sapwood, but you're going to probably pay 20% more.
Yes.
You can purchase no sapwood and knots below a certain size, you're probably paying 40-50% more. So that is something that the consumer really needs to understand. You get what you pay for.
Yeah.
It's like a Beetle and a Ferrari. You ain't going to get a Ferrari without paying for it.
Yeah.
And there is a massive price difference.
Okay.
So in some instances, I would say to customers, if you're being, if you're a little bit particular and you don't want too much of this or too much of that, you're better off buying another 15% stock, which you can keep as attic stock. So if you have a burst geyser later on, you can use it. I've just done a beautiful ash floor for a customer. He ordered 15% wastage, and then we went through it.
And you kind of weed out.
The worst
placement, like under the bed where the bed's going to go.
Exactly. So there the customer's actually. He's paying a little bit of a premium, but at the end of the day, he's landing up with some attic stock. And on top of that, he's got the attic stock, and he's got a floor that is of a higher standard because he's obviously filtered it through. Yeah. So
is sapwood as important when you are doing color stains?
Very much so, and even more if you smoke. So smoking for the lay person is normally an ammonia treatment.
Yeah.
So we expose the wood to an ammonia gas, and that turns the heartwood a beautiful brown, chocolatey brown. The sapwood won't change at all. So now, if you are smoking an oak floor, the more rustical a grade, if you smoke it, the more color variation you get.
Okay, gotcha.
So for instance, if we are smoking, we typically would only choose AB grade timber. We won't choose a very rustical timber because you get boards that are like
zebra.
Absolutely. So there again, you've got to know what you're up to. You've got to know what you're doing. We actually do smoking ourselves, so we kind of have learned over time what's going on with it. Then you also get what we term, customers might have also heard of it, as reactive stains.
Yes, that's very popular at the moment. I'm seeing a lot of that kind of product.
So reactive stains is very similar. Often it's sodium-based or salt-based, and that reacts with the tannin. All of these things, the ammonia gas, the salts, they're reacting with the tannin that's in the oak.
Understood.
The other thing we have problems with is we have people being sold reactive stains for a Zimbo floor. Well, a Zimbo floor ain't going to react with anything. It doesn't have any tannin. And it normally shows an absolute lack of understanding on the salespersons. I've had people come to me and saying to me, but I bought the reactive stain from whoever, and it's not doing anything. Well, it's not doing anything. It can't react with teak or hardwoods or African hardwoods.
Okay, and now greys and whites and those kind of things.
Yeah, greys and white, I would say your most popular color palettes at the moment are the whites and greys.
Yep.
We can also brush the surface, which is quite popular. So that's where you just put it through a great big brush in a machine, and it'll remove the softer parts of the wood.
Yeah.
And leave behind and so it gives you almost just like a textured feel. So that's quite popular. The thing I think you've got to look out for when they're buying the floors, the size of the bevel.
Yes.
Because all of your engineered boards have a bevel being obviously the rounding on the edge. And the reason you have a bevel is so that if you are fitting a pre-finished floor and the screed is not perfectly level, the bevel allows play. So it allows the boards to be fitted together, and you don't read it, you don't pick it up. But obviously a very big bevel can land up having dirt over time in the bevel.
Correct.
So not everybody wants that, but horses for horses. Some people want a great big bevel, others don't. Typically, we would import with about a 0.5 of a mil of a bevel. That would be
quite standard.
Yeah, well, that would be a norm, I would say, in the industry.
I think we've definitely covered this intro to engineered. And thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time. But thank you very much.